along with 2 sweaters, a baseball bat, a glove and a small tape recorder. Mark knelt down and helped the boy pick up the scattered articles. Since they were going the same way, he helped to carry part of the burden. As they walked, Mark discovered the boy's name was Bill, that he loved video games, baseball and history, that he was having a lot of trouble with his other subjects and that he had just broken up with his girlfriend. They arrived at Bill's home first and Mark was invited in for a Coke and to watch some television. The afternoon passed pleasantly with a few laughs and some shared small talk. Then Mark went home. They continued to see each other around school, had lunch together once or twice, then both graduated from junior high school. They ended up in the same high school where they had brief contacts over the years. Finally the long-awaited senior year came, and 3 weeks before graduation, Bill asked Mark if they could talk. Bill reminded him of the day years ago when they had first met. "Do you ever wonder why I was carrying so many things home that day?" asked Bill. "You see, I cleaned out my locker because I didn't want to leave a mess for anyone else. I had stored away some of my mother's sleeping pills and I was going home to commit suicide. But after we spent some time together talking and laughing, I realized that if I had killed myself, I would have missed that time and so many others that might follow. So you see, Mark, when you picked up my books that day, you did a lot more. You saved my life." John W. Schlatter. The smile at each other, smile at your wife, smile at your husband, smile at your children, smile at each other. It doesn't matter who it is, and that will help you to grow up in greater love for each other. Mother Teresa. Many Americans are familiar with The Little Prince, a wonderful book by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. This is a whimsical and fabulous book and works as a children's story as well as a thought-provoking adult fable. Far fewer are aware of Saint-Exupéry's other writings, novels and short stories. Saint-Exupéry was a fighter pilot who fought against the Nazis and was killed in action. Before World War II, he fought in the Spanish Civil War against the fascists. He wrote a fascinating story based on that experience entitled The Smile Lisa Ryer. It is this story which I'd like to share with you now. It isn't clear whether or not he meant this to be autobiographical or fiction. I choose to believe it is the former. He said that he was captured by the enemy and thrown into a jail cell. He was sure that from the contemptuous looks and rough treatment he received from his jailers he would be executed the next day. From here, I'll tell the story as I remember it in my own words. I was sure that I was to be killed. I became terribly nervous and distraught. I fumbled in my pockets to see if there were any cigarettes which had escaped their search. I found one and because of my shaking hands, I could barely get it to my lips. But I had no matches. They had taken those. I looked through the bars at my jailer. He did not make eye contact with me. After all, one does not make eye contact with a thing, the corpse. I called out to him, "Have you got the light, por favor?" He looked at me, shrugged and came over to light my cigarette. As he came close and lit the match, his eyes inadvertently locked with mine. At that moment, I smiled. I don't know why I did that. Perhaps it was nervousness, perhaps it was because, when you get very close, one to another, it is very hard not to smile. In any case, I smiled. In that instant, it was as though a spark jumped across the gap between our two hearts, our two human souls. I know he didn't want to, but my smile leaped through the bars and generated a smile on his lips, too. He lit my cigarette but stayed near, looking Emile directly in the eyes and continuing to smile. I kept smiling at him, now aware of him as a person and not just the jailer. And his looking at me seemed to have a new dimension, too. "Do you have kids?" he asked. "Yes. Here. Here." I took out my wallet and nervously fumbled for the pictures of my family. He, too, took out the pictures of his nanos and began to talk about his plans and hopes for them. My eyes filled with tears. I said that I feared that I'd never see my family again, never have the chance to see them grow up. Tears came to his eyes, too. Suddenly, without another word, he unlocked my cell and silently led me out. Out of the jail, quietly and by back routes, out of the town. There, at the edge of town, he released me. And without another word, he turned back toward the town. My life was saved by a smile. Yes, the smile, the unaffected, unplanned, natural connection between people. I tell this story in my work because I like people to consider that underneath all the layers we construct to protect ourselves, our dignity, our titles, our degrees, our status, and our need to be seen in certain ways, underneath all that remains the authentic, essential self. I'm not afraid to call it the soul. I really believe that if that part of you and that part of me could recognize each other, we wouldn't be enemies. We couldn't have hate or envy or fear. I sadly conclude that all those other layers, which we so carefully construct through our lips, distance and insulate us from truly contacting others. Saint Exupéry's story speaks of that magic moment when souls recognize each other. I've had just a few moments like that. Falling in love is one example. And looking at a baby. Why do we smile when we see the baby? Perhaps it's because we see someone without all the defensive layers, someone whose smile for us we know to be fully genuine and without guile. And that baby's soul inside us smiles wistfully in recognition. Haynoke McCarty. Amy Graham. After flying all night from Washington, D.C., I was tired as I arrived at the Mile High Church in Denver to conduct 3 services and hold a workshop on prosperity consciousness. As I entered the church, Dr. Fred Vogt asked me, "Do you know about the Make-A-Wish Foundation?" "Yes," I replied. "Well, Amy Graham has been diagnosed as having terminal leukemia. They gave her 3 days. Her dying wish was to attend your services." I was shocked. I felt a combination of elation, awe and doubt. I couldn't believe it. I thought kids who were dying would want to go see Disneyland, meet Sylvester Stallone, Mr. T or Arnold Schwarzenegger. Surely they wouldn't want to spend their final days listening to Mark Victor Hansen. Why would a kid with only a few days to live want to come hear a motivational speaker? Suddenly my thoughts were interrupted. "Here's Amy," Vogt said as he put her frail hand in mine. Before me stood a 17-year-old girl wearing a bright red and orange turban to cover her head, which was bald from all of the chemotherapy treatments. Her frail body was bent and weak. She said, "My 2 goals were to graduate from high school and to attend your sermon. My doctors didn't believe I could do either. They didn't think I'd have enough energy. I got discharged into my parents' care. This is my mom and dad." Tears welled in my eyes. I was choked up. My equilibrium was being shaken. I was totally moved. I cleared my throat, smiled and said, "You and your folks are our guests. Thanks for wanting to come." We hugged, dabbed our eyes and separated. I've attended many healing seminars in the United States, Canada, Malaysia, New Zealand and Australia. I've watched the best healers at work and I've studied, researched, listened, pondered and questioned what worked, why and how. That Sunday afternoon I held a seminar that Amy and her parents attended. The audience was packed to overflowing with over 1,000 attendees eager to learn, grow and become more fully human. I humbly asked the audience if they wanted to learn a healing process that might serve them for life. From the stage it appeared that everyone's hand was raised high in the air. They unanimously wanted to learn. I taught the audience how to vigorously rub their hands together, separate them by 2 inches and feel healing energy. Then I paired them off with a partner to feel the healing energy emanating from themselves to another. I said, if you need a healing, accept one here and now. The audience was in alignment and it was an ecstatic feeling. I explained that everyone has healing energy and healing potential. 5% of us have it so dramatically pouring forth from our hands that we could make it our profession. I said, this morning I was introduced to Amy Graham, a 17-year-old, whose final wish was to be at this seminar. I want to bring her up here and let you all send healing life force energy toward her. Perhaps we can help. She did not request it. I am just doing this spontaneously because it feels right. The audience chanted, yes, 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 yes. Amy's dad led her up onto the stage. She looked frail from all of the chemotherapy, too much bed rest and an absolute lack of exercise. The doctors hadn't let her walk for the 2 weeks prior to this seminar. I had the group warm up their hands and send her healing energy, after which they gave her a tearful standing ovation. 2 weeks later she called to say that her doctor had discharged her after a total remission. 2 years later she called to say she was married. I have learned never to underestimate the healing power we all have. It is always there to be used for the highest good. We just have to remember to use it. Mark V. Hansen. A story for Valentine's Day. Larry and Joanne were an ordinary couple. They lived in an ordinary house on an ordinary street. Like any other ordinary couple, they struggled to make ends meet and to do the right things for their children. They were ordinary in yet another way. They had their squabbles. Much of their conversation concerned what was wrong in their marriage and who was to blame. Until one day when a most extraordinary event took place. You know, Joanne, I've got a magic chest of drawers. Every time I open them, they're full of socks and underwear, Larry said. I want to thank you for filling them all these years. Joanne stared at her husband over the top of her glasses. What do you want, Larry? Nothing. I just want you to know I appreciate those magic drawers. This wasn't the first time Larry had done something odd, so Joanne pushed the incident out of her mind until a few days later. Joanne, thank you for recording so many correct check numbers in the ledger this month. You put down the right numbers 15 out of 16 times. That's a record. Disbelieving what she had heard, Joanne looked up from her mending. Larry, you're always complaining about my recording the wrong check numbers. Why stop now? No reason. I just wanted you to know I appreciate